And chat. How's it going, guys? Welcome back to Metal Gear Solid 2. Fair warning, my TV headphones are broken. I have a replacement coming and it should be here by tomorrow, but you may hear a little bit of the game through my microphone. I recorded a bit before I started the stream and didn't hear it though, during the very loud intro theme. Excuse me. So, I guess we'll see. The other thing is, I ordered a $40 RCA to HDMI converter to try to replace the mediocre one that I had that was washing everything out and making it dark. Yeah, of course it sounds good. It hasn't played anything yet. And it resulted in exactly the same output. So either I need a super expensive one, or there's something wrong with my PS2 cables, or that's just what RCA to HDMI looks like. Yeah, mediocre is a bit of an understatement, I guess. Oh, it does look better? Oh, well, okay then. We'll know for sure when we get to darker areas. Fair enough. Yeah, we're going to be opening with the In the Darkness of Shadow Moses. We're going to be finishing that today, and then we'll get back into the game, where I believe we're on the verge of a half-hour-long cutscene, so that'll be interesting. Should be under special, right? In the Darkness of Shadow Moses. To page 42 of 324. All right, let's resume. While the engineers were busy setting up the equipment, I had been briefed on its use as well as the mission. Snake had been delivered to the general area of Shadow Moses Island by USS Discovery, an Ohio-class nuclear submarine. He was then ejected from the submarine on a Swimmer Delivery Vehicle, or SDV, which he abandoned once within the range of underwater listening devices located near the disposal plant. He would swim the rest of the way in the freezing cold Bering Sea water. This last leg of the insertion struck me as nothing short of suicidal until I learned that Solid Snake was outfitted with a state-of-the-art sneaking suit and had been injected with a compound designed to prevent the onset of hypothermia. In addition, while Snake would be the only field operative involved, he would be in radio contact with the support team during much of the mission. MTS sure is a game you spend a lot of time not playing. Yeah, can't wait to get to Metal Gear Solid 4 and watch an hour-long cutscene. Isn't there a problem where the PS3 would go to sleep if you didn't press any buttons from the start of the cutscene to the end? The members of this support team drew from a wide range of backgrounds. The mission control officer was Colonel Roy Campbell, who would remain aboard the USS Discovery. I knew him by reputation alone. He was a former Foxhound commander and Solid Snake's CO during the quelling of the 1999 Zanzibar land uprising. He had retired soon after, but from the looks of things, he had been called out of retirement for this mission. Does the PS3 go to sleep on its own? I don't remember. Dr. Naomi Hunter, a genetic engineering expert on a temporary assignment from the Gentech giant ATGC, was also on the team. She had apparently been leading the bioengineering program for Foxhound. Richard matter-of-factly confirmed that both Foxhound and the Next Generation Special Forces had been undergoing genetic manipulation to enhance their combat capability. I have a difficult time grasping what we have come to, modifying a person's essential genetic structure for the sake of creating a better soldier. Also aboard the Discovery was Mei Ling, the inventor of the new radar and communication system deployed for this mission. She was something of an engineering wunderkind, an MIT student who managed to turn the current protocol of secure communication completely on its head. The last of the support team was MacDonald Miller, a former survival instructor for Foxhound. Unlike the rest of us, he had volunteered his services upon receiving news of the incident on Shadow Moses. Like myself, he was working via satellite link-up from his home in Alaska. Wait, did they not question that? How did quote-unquote Miller hear about the incident? The five of us were more than equipped to support Snake from our respective areas of expertise, but Snake was still the lone field operative, and the mission was a desperate one. Despite that, Richard maintained that this was the most workable plan produced by the DoD situational analysis. In hindsight, perhaps I should have suspected something then. The signs of a conspiracy were there, cleverly disguised as it was in a seemingly reckless mission plan. But we failed to see it, and both Solid Snake and I were to regret our folly bitterly. "It's time, Nastasha," Richard called out as the call signal came on. The line was already live as I nodded to him and took my position. I could feel myself growing keener, more on edge. "This is Nastasha Romanenko. Good to meet you, Solid Snake." "You the nuke expert that the Colonel was talking about?" The voice that responded over the radio was, above all things, calm. Here was a man operating alone out of a deeply hostile territory, and I could sense nothing resembling tension or impatience in his tone. Instead, it was as level and unruffled as someone answering a routine telephone call at their office desk. Impressed, I continued on. When I'm pausing, I'm looking over a chat and reading it. "Correct. If you have any questions about nuclear technology, all you need to do is ask. My department is military analysis, so I should be able to provide support with weapons information as well. I was called into this mission as a Nuclear Emergency Search Team, or NEST, consultant, and I'd like to emphasize that my cooperation was freely given. I have no intention of allowing any nuclear strikes on my watch, let alone the rogue kind. Let me work with you on this one." Also, I do keep a jug of water next to me at all times when I'm at my desk, or in front of my TV, which is also at my desk because they're right next to each other. "You get to the point fast, don't you? There's a missile that's about to fly. A nuclear strike can never be someone else's problem, and I'm not good at standing around twiddling my thumbs. Not that I can do little more than advise in this case." That fact was all too obvious. Snake was the one who was putting his life on the line in Alaska, and I was safe and sound in California. All I could do was talk over the radio. Snake's voice became less abrupt. It may not seem like much, but it's enough. No one's asking you to come out here and fight. That's my job. Anyway, Nastasha, I'll be counting on your help. It was a strangely comforting voice, a voice that inspired trust, despite sounding like this. Same here. As I answered, I resolved to myself to do everything in my power to help him complete this mission. The nuclear weapons disposal plant on Shadow Moses dates back to 2002. It was built solely for the purpose of temporarily storing nuclear warheads slated for disposal. I started to brief Snake on the background of the disposal facility, running through the points he needed to know. My first short exchange with Solid Snake ever, I was beginning to understand why he was called the man who makes the impossible possible. The icy calm in the face of insurmountable difficulty, the absolute confidence, made it suddenly seem possible that he would pull off this deadly mission. He had the power to make me believe. I grew conscious of Richard's gaze. What? Oh, just that you have a kind of glow about you when you're working. I like it. A glow? Funny. You used to call it workaholism in the past. You found it very unappealing, I recall. Time flies. People change their minds. It's called nostalgia. You'll dislike it again soon enough. Perhaps. Then I saw Snake's face. Now I'm a believer. Richard continued to look at me. Solid Snake certainly managed to live up to his reputation. He adroitly wove his way through the enemy's patrols and infiltrated the nuclear weapons disposal plant, where he made contact with Donald Anderson, the DARPA director. Throughout the mission, we had radio monitoring capability over Snake's every movement, thanks to his internal nanomachines. It was through this access channel that I learned a shocking fact. Donald Anderson, discovered in solitary confinement by Solid Snake, confirmed that the terrorists had full nuclear capability and that Shadow Moses Island was the site of a field exercise for Metal Gear. Metal Gear. The very mention of that name sent me reeling. It was the ultimate weapon, a nuclear-capable bipedal tank that could launch a rapid and accurate nuclear strike from virtually any terrain. From mountains to marshlands to the desert dunes. It could bestow the dubious privilege of initiating a missile strike from sites that were previously out of the question as launch locations. For that very reason, analysts had long predicted that if brought to fruition, Metal Gear technology would rewrite the tactical map of the world. There are speculations that this unholy grail of weapons development was being pursued late last century in the South African fortress state of Outer Heaven, then in the ultra-nationalist sovereignty of Zanzibar land in Central Asia. One source went so far as to claim that a working prototype had been produced, but the weapon never made it onto the world military stage. Instead, it was destroyed by a Special Forces operative. The squad in question was Foxhound, and the operative was a man codenamed Solid Snake. I briefly wondered if it were some strange quirk of fate that had brought Snake into this latest incident, but I knew Richard too well. Snake had to have been called in because of his past battles. Whoever had planned this mission had been thorough, and the more I realized the fact, the less I liked it. A few years ago, I interviewed a high-ranking DoD official and led the conversation to the subject of Metal Gear. His response at the time was that the U.S. had very little interest in developing a weapon like Metal Gear, not that he officially admitted that such a thing as the Metal Gear existed. On a purely hypothetical level, if such a technology were available. With the collapse of the Soviet Union, nuclear arsenals built to enforce the idea of mutually assured destruction had lost its justification, and the deterrent argument was losing ground. About that, in the current multilateral world order rife with smaller regional powers, as he put it, development priority lay with cruise missiles and smaller weapons with lower lethality that could be carried by stealth bombers. He also went on to note that Metal Gear, with its affinity for rough terrain, would be extremely difficult to discover and destroy. Hence, it was the perfect nuclear strike system for rogue states. He was deeply concerned that if such non-democratic sovereignties were to get a hold of Metal Gear technology, the resulting upset in the balance of military power would lead to a massive rupture in world order. It was a fear that I myself shared. An artifact of the Cold War, the devil's candy, created by nuclear proliferation. That was what Metal Gear seemed to be. The devil's candy? There's a phrase I've never heard before. So why was this weapon, a cutting-edge technology that was politically long obsolete, being developed once again on American soil? It was possible that the Defense Department wanted to restore last century's nuclear strategy to the national agenda. Or did this new Metal Gear have something that set it far apart from Metal Gear as I knew it? Anderson had more to say. Metal Gear's launch key consisted of two separate passwords, one held by Anderson himself and the other by Kenneth Baker, the president of ArmsTech. Anderson's own password was already in the terrorists' hands, and he feared that the same was true for Baker's. A renegade foxhound psychic, codenamed Psycho Mantis, had literally read Anderson's mind and obtained the key. The bottom line was that the terrorists could activate Metal Gear and launch the missile whenever they pleased. The worst-case scenario had come true. However, Anderson revealed that there was still a way to prevent the nuclear strike. Kenneth Baker alone had the emergency override key that could be used to re-enter the launch code and cancel the missile launch. Even if the terrorists had already completed preparations for a strike, the override would reverse the process. His only hope now riding on obtaining the override key, Snake attempted to leave the cell area with Anderson in tow. We heard the terrible cries over the radio at the same time Snake did. Anderson had suddenly started to clutch at his own chest in agony, and before we could even recover from our initial shock, he was dead. Dr. Naomi Hunter, monitoring the situation from onboard USS Discovery, tentatively diagnosed the cause of death as a heart attack. Snake walked out of the cell alone in search of Kenneth Baker, leaving behind what had until recently been Donald Anderson, chief of DARPA. All right, what exactly is going on here? I confronted Richard as soon as I confirmed Snake's safe departure. You know the situation. There was a Metal Gear field exercise being conducted on Shadow Moses. Foxhound and the Next Generation Commandos were in charge of the exercise, and now they're threatening to use the Metal Gear to launch a nuclear strike. Apparently, I didn't know about that particular situation. If you say so. I glared at Richard, but he didn't turn a hair. He knew as well as I did that I could not abandon the mission. Even if I did refuse to cooperate further, there was an entire group of DoD personnel around me that would not permit that to happen. I briefly closed my eyes and brought the recent events into focus again. What happened to Anderson? Why is he dead? This time I could see a trace of a reaction in Richard's eyes. It's hard to say from our end. Naomi thinks it was a heart attack, but I'll have his medical records pulled, just in case. He turned and left the study, presumably to give orders to that effect. The sounds and the voice being broadcast from the radio told me that Snake was moving deeper into the complex in search of Kenneth Baker. Snake found the ArmsTech president in one of the underground levels. Kenneth Baker was bound to a steel girder along with multiple packets of C4 explosives. Before Snake could free Baker, he came face to face with the originator of this trap, a Foxhound operative called Revolver Ocelot. It seemed that he had anticipated Baker's rescue attempt upon receiving news of Snake's arrival. According to Naomi Hunter, the former director of Foxhound's genetic manipulation program, Revolver Ocelot is a former Spetsnaz. He moved into Oman, Otriad Militsi Osobogo Naznachenia, the Interior Ministry Riot Squad, aka Black Berets, and the SVR, the Russian Foreign Intelligence Service, a successor to the KGB's first chief directorate, after the collapse of the Soviet Union, but was unable to adapt to the new regime and dropped out. He cut a swath through the world's hotspots as a mercenary before being recruited by Foxhound. As his codename indicates, Ocelot is a master marksman with a marked preference for revolvers. We could hear the gun battle between Snake and Ocelot over the radio. Ocelot was using an antique single-action Army revolver against Snake's SOCOM pistol. The first single-action Army revolver was manufactured in 1873. Oh, this is a diversion into Kojima's gun fetish. A small number of them are still in production today, but strictly for collectors and antique weapon fanciers. Using this outmoded weapon for live combat is unheard of. But Ocelot seemed to invest the vintage gun with diabolical powers. He would purposefully fire against walls and the floor, weaving a tight web of ricocheting bullets around Snake, gradually hemming him in. All we could do was silently monitor the battle. However, Snake was slowly but surely gaining the upper hand by dodging the ricochets and exploiting the revolver's lengthy reload window. Finally, just as Snake was about to deliver the decisive blow, an explosion rang out. "My hand!" Ocelot's scream came a second later, followed by more explosions. "What the hell is going on?" Richard cried. The controller in charge of the data sent in by Snake's nanomachines started a running commentary. "We don't know yet. I'm seeing a life sign other than those of Snake, Ocelot, or Baker." Explosions continued to boom out over the radio. "The unidentified fourth subject is knocking down girders. No sign of firearm use. Whatever it is, it's moving fast." The controller's voice rose with excitement. "The speed is well above anything a human being should be able to handle." The situation was chaotic. I could make out Ocelot's voice through the roar of collapsing metal. "Stealth camouflage! Someone left a job only half done. As for you, we'll continue this later." It seemed Ocelot had left the area. The explosions went on one after the other as girders crashed to the ground. In the midst of the collapse, Snake confronted what we could only guess was the fourth life sign. "Who are you?" "I'm like you. I have no name." It was not human, but an artificial machine voice that answered. In spite of the metallic tones, there seemed to be in that voice an unspeakable pain. Baker's labored groans could be heard over the conversation. "No, it was a human voice." "Right? Am I misremembering? Was there a voice processing effect over Gray Fox's voice when he first showed up?" "You have a reinforced skeleton?" Suddenly, the possessor of the metal voice let loose an animal howl. The shattering scream set the communication speakers screeching, and I instinctively covered my ears to shut out the maddened sound. There was a little voice changer, but not that much. The cry went on and on, then cut out as abruptly as it had begun. In the ringing silence, the controller's voice floated out, thin and hollow. "The fourth subject has disappeared." The words brought us out of a state of shock. "Can we track him?" "Negative. He's vanished. No traces." "Collect as much data as you can. I have the full results on information relayed by the nanomachines. There's an electromagnetic pattern that resembles a stealth camouflage signature." "Stealth camo and reinforced exoskeleton," Richard muttered, deep in thought. "Not everything is happening according to plan, I take it?" I inquired with some sarcasm. "It's within acceptable deviation. The mission will go on as planned." For a split second his eyes betrayed his disquiet. Then he quickly recovered his characteristic arrogance. "You just concentrate on your job." Snake had called the fourth life sign the Ninja. I could not help but wonder about the identity of the name's bearer and what it was that accounted for the superhuman abilities he had just demonstrated. Far away on Shadow Moses Island, Snake was attempting to raise the shaken Kenneth Baker back on his feet. We could hear Snake asking him about the nuclear launch code, knowing the answer even as he spoke. Baker painfully acknowledged that he had volunteered the information. His arm hung broken and useless by his side, presumably Ocelot's handiwork. According to Naomi Hunter's intelligence, Revolver Ocelot had served as a special interrogations consultant in the Soviet gulags during his days with the Spetsnaz. In other words, he was an expert in torture. There was no way that the weapons technology executive, an untrained civilian, could withstand the techniques of coercion developed in the cells of Lubyanka. We now had confirmation that the terrorists possessed both launch keys. The situation was more desperate than ever. Baker's response to Snake's queries about the emergency override key was almost as grim. He had entrusted a soldier, a woman who had refused to join the mutiny, with it while they had been sharing the cell. I caught Snake's sudden murmur. The Colonel's niece? The Colonel was presumably Campbell, and Snake seemed to know something I certainly did not. I stole a glance at Richard, but his expression was as closed as ever. He no doubt had known from the outset about the presence of Campbell's niece on Shadow. Snake was pressing Baker, asking him whether there was a way to stop the launch without the override code. The executive gave him a name, Dr. Hal Emmerich. If it were indeed the case that the launch codes were in hostile hands and the strike sequence had been started, it stood to reason that the only person who may know of a way to cancel the launch was the chief of Metal Gear's development program. As Snake promised to search out Emmerich, Baker handed him a single optical disc. It contained, he said, all the data from the training exercise. What exercise data? He had to be referring to the Metal Gear exercise. I saw Richard raise his eyebrows sharply. Baker, oblivious to the frenzy of speculation he had remotely set off, continued. There's no need to feign ignorance. You were sent to retrieve this, and we both know it. I was now even more puzzled than ever. If Metal Gear was being developed on Shadow Moses, surely the research data was backed up somewhere outside of the Armstech lab. Not only that, but why would the president of the company have been carrying the data himself? I was apparently not alone in my disconcertment. Snake took the disc, obviously uncertain. It was clear that he, like myself, had not been briefed on the existence of the disc. The disc safely out of his hands, Baker's tones became pleading. You have to stop them. If the truth got out, AT would be finished. I would be finished. But Metal Gear technology is already a known factor. The core technology is, but that's not... Baker trailed off, suddenly pale with pain. Oh, God, what did you do to me? We could hear his labored coughing as he gasped out. It can't be. That thing. Damn Pentagon bureaucrats. I get it now. You son of a... He tried to lunge at Snake, but reeled back in fresh wave of pain. Still clutching his chest, he fell down, dead. It was too similar to the last moments of Donald Anderson's life, and the fact had not escaped Snake. He was immediately on the radio with Campbell. "2001: A Space Odyssey is worth watching as a historical movie. It was one of the first high-budget sci-fi movies. But as a result, it focuses a lot on the special effects and kind of drags. So I would watch it as a historical, out of historical interest, but not expecting to see a really good movie. High budget and very high concept, yeah. It's very cool, but as a movie, it suffers from the way it was made and focused on. Colonel, you'd better be listening real well. This one dropped dead too. Snake demanded an explanation, but neither Campbell nor Dr. Hunter could provide an adequate one. Snake was clearly dissatisfied, but Campbell directed Snake to cooperate with his niece, Meryl. The only way left to prevent a nuclear strike was to obtain the emergency override key, and the key was in Meryl's hands. Snake walked away from Baker's body in search of the elusive commando. Kenneth Baker had been colluding with Donald Anderson, the DARPA chief, to secretly develop a new Metal Gear on the government's so-called black budget. My later investigations revealed that the regular payments in the tens of thousands of dollars had been made to the corporate account of a firm for which Anderson's wife ostensibly acted as a consultant. The arms tech payoff into this dummy company had started several years ago. The total amount is difficult to estimate, but there is little doubt that Anderson had been bribed to the tune of an astronomical sum. Even the government black budget had limits, however. I recalled a rumor from some years before the Anderson payoff started. The CNO, or Chief of Naval Operations at the time, had a classified pet project, and the scuttlebutt was that it involved the construction of a completely new type of battleship. Just what kind of a ship was never revealed, since the entire program fell apart after the CNO suddenly passed away. The unexpected death coincided with ArmsTech's launch of the Metal Gear development program. The black budget earmarked for the CNO's little project must have been freed up by his death. The question was whether it had been freed up for allocation to the new Metal Gear development. The manner of the CNO's death was officially ruled as suicide, but I could not help recall the theories to the contrary that had made its rounds back then. Whatever the background, Anderson and Baker's deaths could not be a coincidence. Anderson's dying words included a reference to the Pentagon, and I was certain that there was more to it than met the eye. So now Baker is dead as well. Are you looking into his medical records too? I asked Richard. We'll do that, just as a precaution. He did not seem particularly disturbed. It may have been for the best anyway. Having to babysit a senior citizen with a broken arm sure wasn't going to help Snake with his mission. You haven't changed a bit, I see. What? That bad boy act of yours. You only talk like an insensitive jerk to divert attention from something. I wonder what you're hiding. Richard turned away. Nothing. There's nothing to hide. Having successfully made radio contact with Meryl, Colonel Campbell's niece, Solid Snake agreed to put off a rendezvous with her in favor of rescuing Dr. Hal Emmerich, the chief of Metal Gear development. He reached the lab just as the ninja was attempting to attack Dr. Emmerich, and the two fighters immediately squared off. Snake and the ninja launched into a silent hand-to-hand combat, a balletic exchange of blows that seemed almost to serve as a private dialogue. The fighting seemed interminable to us as we followed over the radio, but just as in the last encounter, the ninja suddenly let loose an inhuman howl and vanished in the maelstrom of its ragged echo. It was our second encounter with the ninja, and we were as in the dark about him as ever. But Snake had recognized something during their battle, and he raised Campbell on the radio. It's Gray Fox. The ninja is Gray Fox. I'm 100% sure. Snake canonically went for a punch-up with Gray Fox. Well, yeah. Because it's nearly impossible to defeat him with guns, and it's a cooler fight if you do it with punches. That's impossible. You took him in Zanzibar land. We could hear the perturbation in Campbell's voice. Naomi Hunter suddenly cut in. Yes, he was supposed to have been killed, but he wasn't. Dr. Hunter revealed that her predecessor at the helm of Foxhound's genetic treatment program, one Dr. Clark, had been conducting human testing. Gray Fox, the alpha soldier of Foxhound, and the only member allowed the Fox designation, was the subject. After he had been shipped back from Zanzibar land, mortally wounded, his superior physical abilities and combat skills had marked him as an ideal test subject for genetic manipulation and skeletal reinforcement experiments. He was listed as killed in action, but kept alive in a lab. I could not help but note, with some surprise, the emotional tone in which the normally collected geneticist described these events. About her brother! When Snake asked why she had not volunteered the truth of the ninja's identity earlier, Naomi had only a terse reply. It was classified information. According to records she had seen, the subject, Gray Fox, had died in an accidental lab explosion 2 years ago. I turned to Richard. Is this true? What's true? The accident in the lab. It's true. The cause of the explosion was never determined. Dr. Clark died in the accident, and the only remains they could find of Gray Fox were fragments of the reinforced skeleton. So Naomi wasn't the only one who knew about this and didn't say anything. It was classified information, Richard mimicked. Snake secured Dr. Emmerich after the ninja's departure. Amazingly enough, the engineer had believed Metal Gear to be a portable tactical missile defense system rather than a nuclear-capable tank. It was a peculiar irony that the chief developer himself had been unaware that the project was one of offense rather than defense. On discovering that he had been deceived, Dr. Emmerich volunteered his expertise to Snake. He mentioned his grandfather's involvement in the Manhattan Project and the ethical turmoil the man had carried with him to the end of his days as a result. Ironically enough, the older scientist's son, Hal Emmerich's father, was born the day the atomic bomb had found Hiroshima. 3 generations. Sometimes I wonder if nuclear warfare is our personal albatross, an inherited pathology. We could hear the pain and the regret in Dr. Emmerich's voice. He seemed genuinely upset that the technology he had developed purely for the furthering of knowledge and betterment of mankind had been exploited for weapons development. You may call me harsh, but I felt little sympathy for him. Technological and scientific innovation need not have direct bearing on nuclear or virological research to contribute to the making of weapons of mass destruction. After all, the ninja was born of genetic engineering and cybernetic research, which could easily have healed a civilian rather than improved upon a soldier. A scientist cannot plead naivete to the practical products of their own research. The consequences must be anticipated, and the ethical burden of a newly developed technology must ultimately rest with the individual researcher. I wondered if Dr. Emmerich would ever realize that onus. Freed from the laboratory where he was being held, Emmerich cloaked himself with a stealth camouflage of his own making and promised to keep out of sight. Literally. With the stealth camo, he could easily evade the terrorist surveillance. His rescue charge safe, Snake departed for a rendezvous with Merrill. Hi, Cobweb. Yeah? Yeah? Meow? Meow? Snake's objective was to meet with Merrill and re-enter the launch code using her override key, outwitting the Foxhound psychic Psycho Mantis all the while. To this end, he headed towards the hangar where Metal Gear was being stored. I'm cat-sitting for my parents. The best laid plans. Merrill was ambushed on the way by the Foxhound sharpshooter Sniper Wolf. Snake, attempting to rescue the wounded commando, was himself captured. He was taken to the terrorist command post, still unconscious, stripped of all his gear. However, his cochlear implant radio passed unnoticed, and we could hear the terrorists conferring about the incapacitated operative. We gathered from their talk that the preparations for the nuclear launch were complete. Richard was unusually intent on identifying the individual terrorists in the room. From the voices involved in the conversation, we confirmed the presence of Sniper Wolf, Revolver Ocelot, and the leader of this uprising himself, Liquid Snake. Yeah, I know, you're rubbing against my ankle. I can't pet you right now, kitty. I'm busy. Sorry. I know. I'm sorry. What little I knew of Liquid Snake was troubling, and it came entirely from a slim file folder Richard showed me just prior to mission commencement. The man with the same designation as Solid Snake was recruited into Foxhound after Solid Snake's departure from the unit. His fighting skills were formidable, and he quickly rose to leadership position in Foxhound's field operation team. His real name, place of origin, and other information remained classified. Only a single photograph accompanied the documents, and I had not been able to contain my astonishment at the sight of it. "It's not a mistake. That is Liquid Snake," said Richard, echoing my thoughts. Let the cat read the book. But how? The face in the photo was the spitting image of Solid Snake. I wouldn't know, but once the two snakes run into each other, something may come out. His words were non-committal, but Richard's tone spoke volumes. Okay, I'll pet you a little, but only for a second. And now the two snakes, Solid and Liquid, had indeed come face to face. But Liquid had little to say. "So long, brother," he called out before turning and walking away. The voice was full of hatred, but there was also something in it that seemed to confirm and gleefully anticipate another meeting. Why this was so was as mysterious to me as the reason he called Solid Snake brother. I would not find out the truth until a little later. What awaited Snake after his brief encounter with Liquid was Ocelot's KGB-tested interrogation techniques. Ocelot apparently had no interest in extracting information, but rather appeared to be enjoying the acts of torture for their own sake. Snake's ragged gasps echoed from the radio in the silence of the control room. The heart rate and other physiological data transmitted by his nanomachines graphically demonstrated the extent of his suffering. All we could do was listen and wait. After Ocelot was done, the battered Snake was taken to a cell. Campbell soon established radio contact with him, but Snake had some hard questions for his former CO instead. He had realized that Metal Gear was a nuclear delivery system, and for once Campbell was at a loss for an answer. "So you did know about this all along," Snake rasped out bitterly. Campbell continued to be silent. It was all the confirmation Snake needed. "You should have told me." "I'm sorry. Pawns don't need to know, is that it? You've changed." Campbell had no rebuttal to Snake's barbs. According to Campbell, even the president had apparently been unaware of the existence of Project Rex until the day before. To make matters more complicated, he was due to meet with the Russian president the following day for the formal signing of START 3. The treaty stipulated further reduction of the nuclear arsenal, picking up where START 2 left off. The agreement would reduce the number of Russian and American tactical ballistic missiles to somewhere between 2,000 and 2,500, and the signing was a historic event that had been made possible by long and arduous process. If the fact that a new nuclear weapon was being developed by the United States were made public, there was a significant chance that the signing would never take place. Worse still, the loss of confidence in America's commitment to non-proliferation could create international turmoil. The government clearly had every reason to keep the situation under wraps, and there were ample indications that the terrorists had counted on the fact. The timing of this takeover, as well as the 24-hour deadline, said as much. Campbell continued to plead his case with Snake. "Snake, you've got to stop them. Sing it to someone else. You're the only hope we have." "All right, then. Tell me what this new warhead is about." "I told you, I don't know." "I don't believe you." "If the situation is so desperate, why don't you accept their demands? Give them Big Boss's body. It's just a corpse." "That's not an option." Campbell was floundering under the barrage of Snake's questions. "Is there a reason you can't comply with that demand? A reason you haven't told me?" Naomi broke in as Campbell fell silent. The President's passed a number of policies that severely restrict genetic engineering on humans. He can't afford to have the public know about the military's use of genetically enhanced soldiers. "Is that really all there is to it?" Campbell did not reply. I received a call from Snake soon after. Captive, alone in enemy territory, unable to trust his own mission controllers to tell him the truth, there was little I could say to help a man in Snake's position. Snake's situation. Capture does not mean defeat. Stay vigilant for a chance to escape, and don't give up. I had doubts about the effectiveness of these words coming from someone with no combat experience, but it was the best I could offer. We had no choice but to trust in Snake's abilities. "Is it going to be canon that he used the ketchup? Please tell me it's canon that he used the ketchup." As I closed the radio channel, I caught Richard studying me. "Yes? You're very passionate about this job. Do you object? It's the job you forced on me, after all." "No, but I admit that I'm a little jealous." "Ah, the jealousy act. Yes, I know that one too." Richard averted his eyes. "I wouldn't call it an act. No, forget it." He lit a cigarette. Chesterfield, the same brand as Humphrey Bogart. "You still smoke the same brand. You know me. Once I decide I like something, I can't kick the habit. Cigarettes, line of work, woman, everything." He didn't look at me as he replied. Genital Jousting is a video game that came out in 2016 is why she said that." The torture was conducted again and again, solely for the purpose of breaking Snake. He held out each time, but his strength was steadily ebbing, and the voice we heard over the radio was growing more labored. "Naomi, talk to me. I need something to distract me." "What do you want me to talk about?" "Anything. I'm not good at finding things to talk about." "Tell me about yourself." "About me? That's not so easy. You got any family?" "It's not a very happy story." "I don't have any family. I guess there was one person, someone who called himself my father." "Where is he?" "Dead. I killed him." I was even more taken aback by what Campbell volunteered next. "You're talking about Big Boss." "What? Big Boss was your—" "No reason you should have known," Campbell elaborated to Naomi. "It was 6 years ago in Zanzibar land. Snake and I are the only ones who know about it now." "Oh, God! Was Big Boss really your father?" Naomi still seemed disbelieving. "That's what he said, and that's all I know." "You knew, and you still killed him?" "Yeah." "Why?" Naomi asked fiercely. There was a pause before Snake answered. "Because that's what he wanted, and what I wanted." "But it's still patricide." "Yeah, I know. My personal nightmare, too." Snake's voice was the faintest we had heard. "Is that why you left, Foxhound?" "Maybe. I can't deny that it felt good to lose myself. It's easy to do that in Alaska." After a moment of silence, Naomi confided in a low voice. "Genital jousting has a story mode? What?" Oh shit, I pressed the wrong button. God damn it. I was on page 120 or something, I think. Oh, I can hold the button down and go 10 pages at a time. Okay, cool. That is an actual game, yes. Well, Achievement Hunter posted a genital jousting video on YouTube years ago, so presumably I could put it on YouTube, but I think I'm going to pass. Not my kind of game. Yes, it's a party game. It's a multiplayer versus game where each of you controls a penis and you try to lodge it in each other's butts. I don't really have a family of my own either. I have a brother who put me through college. That's it. He's not a biological brother and a lot older than me. Where's he now? Naomi's reply was deeply pained. He's gone. There was deep sorrow in her voice, and, I thought, something more. As much as I want to finish this read-through today, if Laura the viewers gets bored, we can pause around the 200-page mark and the 2-hour mark, whichever comes first. Yeah, I was going to suggest the same thing, because we've been going for almost an hour, and we are only almost 100 pages in out of 280. So why don't we stop around page 200 and save the end of this for next month. $162-page mark is the halfway point. Yes, but it's not the halfway point of what we had left. We had 282 pages left. So the 184 page mark, 183 page is the halfway mark. A stepbrother who put her through school. I wasn't told about that, Richard muttered. There was suspicion in his voice, and, puzzlingly enough, a hint of anger. I opened the personnel profile on Naomi. Naomi Hunter, born New York City, 1980X, PhD in genetics, recruited by the industry giant ATGC soon after completing doctoral program, moved to California's so-called biotech Bay Area, led several genetic therapy programs until recruited by Foxhound to fill the post of chief geneticist as a result of her accomplishments in this field. Parents died in car collision when Naomi was 2 years old. One brother, 10 years her senior, a U.S. Marine, killed in training-related accident when Naomi was 17. Richard thought for a minute, then scribbled something in his notebook. Summoning one of his men, he tore the page out and handed it to him. Wire this message to the skipper of USS Discovery, and make sure Campbell doesn't know about it. What are you plotting now? I knew even as I asked that Richard would not respond. The torture was repeated time and again, but Snake managed to take advantage of the guards' waning vigilance and escape. The location and the fate of his fellow hostage, Merrill, eluded us. Evading the intense manhunt that followed, Snake still refused to stray from the course that led to the Metal Gear hangar. What drove him? Guilt for Merrill's capture and an urge to avenge her, a sense of duty to the mission, the will to stop the carnage of a nuclear strike? None of them seemed to apply to Snake. He was an enigma. We could do little but watch over him as he ran, wounded and exhausted. After successfully taking on Sniper Wolf as she re-emerged for an ambush, Snake closed in on the Metal Gear hangar, only to discover Vulcan Raven, Giant, and Shaman blocking his way. The giant Foxhound operative, armed with a fighter-plane Gatling gun, which only has one T in it, was a daunting enemy. In the end, however, Snake eventually prevailed. The stricken Raven, leaning against the wall, started to speak as Snake approached him. There are some breeds of snakes that nature never intended. I think you and the boss belong to one of those. Go and settle it with him. I'll be watching how it ends. The dying Raven then dropped the bombshell. I'll give you one clue. The man who died in front of you wasn't the DARPA chief. It was Decoy Octopus, one of us foxhounds. He was a master of disguise. I guess the Grim Reaper was the only one he couldn't fool. Is he dead? Raven did not answer Snake's sharp query. Snake tried another tack. Why go to all that trouble and impersonate Anderson? Raven smiled faintly. That's all the clue you're going to get. Everything else you'll have to figure out yourself. A few minutes later, Vulcan Raven, Giant, and Shaman died. Richard was chagrined. So that's how it was. They had us completely fooled. Why would Octopus impersonate Anderson? I asked. I don't know. Maybe to get information out of Snake. That would mean that they knew Snake was coming. Richard stubbed out the cigarette without answering. His face was expressionless, but I knew exactly what he was thinking. We had a leak. While Richard and I were talking, a call was made to Snake. Snake, it's me. Master? Snake answered. It was apparently Master Miller. I need to talk to you about Naomi Hunter. Turn the monitoring off. Miller had barely finished his instruction before Campbell cut in. What about Dr. Hunter? Miller made an exasperated sound. It was clear that he had not intended Campbell to hear what he had to say. Colonel, is Naomi there? Snake asked. No, she's trying to catch up on her sleep. Okay. Campbell turned his attention back to Miller. What were you saying about Dr. Hunter? All right, maybe it's better that the Colonel hears about this now, Miller said resignedly. Go on, urged Snake. That's not the real Naomi Hunter you're working with, Colonel. What? Campbell raised his voice, astounded. Miller continued coolly. Naomi Hunter does exist. Or rather, she did. She went missing in the Middle East some time ago. This imposter must have gotten a hold of her identity somehow. There were a number of ways to obtain someone's social security number and commit an identity theft, certainly. But Dr. Naomi Hunter, an imposter? Who is she really, then? Campbell was agitated, but Miller remained cool as ice. Probably a spy. A spy? Yes, sent in to ensure this mission's failure. Are you saying she's one of the terrorists? Campbell's tone was disbelieving, but Snake backed up his former instructor. I don't want to believe it either, Colonel, but it's true that she's a Foxhound personnel, so it would not be surprising if she took part in this insurrection. Campbell finished dully, as though Snake's words had crystallized his own doubts. Or she could be working for another organization, Miller suggested. Another? No, that's not possible. As Campbell trailed off, Miller spoke up, his tone ruthless. Take her into custody, Colonel. What? It's clear that Naomi Hunter is working against us. Interrogate her and find out what her objective is. If she really is their spy, we're in serious trouble, Campbell murmured. Miller pounced on the gravity of the colonel's tone. What are you talking about? Nothing in particular. Campbell tried to recover himself. Campbell, did you give her access to some other line of classified information? Bleak Forest, thank you for the Prime sub. I appreciate it. I'm getting lots of subs this month. I've got 13 subscribers right now. That's $2.40 per. That's 20. That's 26. That's $31.20. So that's going to put me over the threshold I need to get paid out by Twitch. It was mostly gifted subs by Alana and other people. Campbell remained silent, but Miller pressed on. Does it have anything to do with the way the DARPA chief or the Arms Tech president died? Look, I don't know what you're talking about. Clearly, Campbell knew something. It was equally obvious that he had no intention of revealing what he was privy to. Perhaps sensing that fact, Miller dropped the pursuit abruptly. In any case, it's too dangerous to retain her in the mission. Hold on a minute. She is an integral part of this mission. In fact, we can't afford to proceed without her. Campbell was being too insistent about Dr. Hunter's value. I had to wonder if it was indeed the case that he had trusted her with highly classified information. Snake was also suspicious. More secrets, Colonel. Give me time. I'll have her background and movements rechecked. That was all Campbell could say. Hurry. Find out what she wants as quickly as possible. Miller was unrelenting. Of course, Campbell agreed reluctantly. Snake, just give me some time. Time is something I wasn't given a lot of, Snake growled bitterly. All right, I'm going to take a quick break, rest my throat. I'll be back in a minute. Yeah, Cobweb, got nothing to say? Can you hear her purring or just meowing? Just meows? That's a shame. All right, we'll get started again in just a second. All right, back to it. What's the deal? I said to Richard. Is Miller right about Naomi? I don't know, to be honest. It's obvious there were things in Dr. Hunter's past that I didn't know about. I'm having them go over her background again. Richard was visibly upset, a rare occurrence. I suddenly wondered there had been something between him and Naomi. Richard lit a cigarette and continued in a more composed tone. But if what Miller said about Naomi is true, it raises questions about him in turn. Why do you say that? He's supposed to be in his cabin in Alaska. So I hear. How did he manage to find out so much about Naomi by himself and from the middle of nowhere when the DIA investigators couldn't? Richard called one of his men over and ordered them to look into Miller's activities. You check up on even one of your own? I asked as the agent hurried away. How do you know he's one of our own? Richard shot back, blowing a stream of smoke. Should I assume you don't trust me either? You're the one who doesn't trust me. Never have, he said quietly, and ground his cigarette into the ashtray. At least Richard is more polite about his smoking than Bigby, who just drops his cigarettes wherever, inside, and stamps them out and rubs them into the floor. God, that's such a shitty thing for a smoker to do. Smoking is bad enough already, but dropping your cigarette inside and putting it out with your boot inside is so shitty. Snake had finally reached the Metal Gear hangar and stood in the shadow of the machine's 50-foot-tall bulk. But considering Metal Gear's state-of-the-art composite armor and Snake's limited arsenal, it was improbable that he could destroy the tank while evading enemy patrols. The most practical avenue of attack was to re-enter the launch code using the override key and thereby cancel the scheduled nuclear strike. Man, we're not even halfway through the pages, and we're nearly at the end of the game. As Snake methodically searched for the code entry interface, Emmerich radioed in. He had been making himself useful by breaking into Baker's protected files. From these, he had pieced together the true nature of Metal Gear and its prototype warheads. According to Emmerich, The weapon used a built-in railgun to fire the ballistic missiles clear of the atmosphere. The missile would then automatically realign itself and re-enter the atmosphere on its designated trajectory toward the target. I understood exactly what all this meant, and the knowledge left me cold. Normally, ballistic missiles go through 4 phases from launch to impact. The first is the boost phase, which consists of the time between the missile's launch and the point at which it leaves the atmosphere and exhausts its supply of rocket propellant. Following the burnout, the rocket enters the post-boost phase, which concludes with the separation of the re-entry vehicle that contains the warhead. The third stage is the mid-course phase, in which the re-entry vehicle separates and achieves a controlled descent back into the atmosphere. The warhead's re-entry into the atmosphere and its arrival at the target mark the fourth and terminal phase. Current missile defense systems detect incoming ballistic missiles by scanning for the rocket burn that takes place during the missile's boost stage. However, Metal Gear's missile technology employs a railgun rather than conventional rocket propulsion to achieve boost stage acceleration. As a result, there is nothing for existing missile defense systems to detect. The railgun's effectiveness is nothing short of amazing, with a range of over 3,000 miles, rivaling that of mid-range ballistic missiles. It reliably homes in within 170 feet of the target 50% of the time, placing it in the same class as high-end ICBMs. The ability of a Metal Gear to conquer virtually all terrain means that the railgun can launch a stealthy nuclear strike from almost any spot on the globe. This invisible attack would make it impossible for anyone to pinpoint the origin of a given missile, even in the event of a strike. Without a clear aggressor to retaliate against, the concept of mutual assured destruction falls apart. Without the fear of MAD, the existing rules of nuclear non-engagement would no longer apply, and the world would fall into chaos. Snake had a few things to say to Campbell after learning the truth. He knew as well as anyone that if the fact that the U.S. had been developing a new breed of nuclear weapons were made public on the eve of START 3, negotiations would break down and the U.S. would suffer a devastating embarrassment. "Did you know about this, Colonel?" "I really am sorry, Snake. You really have changed. I won't offer any excuses." "Snake, you've got to hear this." Dr. Emmerich broke in, ignoring Campbell. "The new missiles were complete in simulation only. That's why they had to perform this exercise, to get field data that would back up their simulation results." "How did the exercise go?" Snake asked. Emmerich's reply was discouraging. "It seems to have gone better than they expected, but I can't find any of the data. There isn't a trace of the thing on the entire network. You'd think it's backed up somewhere, but zilch." "It's on the optical disc that Baker gave me." "You mean you still have it?" Campbell exclaimed hopefully. "No, Ocelot took it," Snake replied bitterly. "It must have happened when he was a hostage. Did this mean that Ocelot had known of the existence of the exercise data beforehand?" "This doesn't look good," Campbell murmured, deep in thought. I glared at Richard. "You knew about this too, didn't you?" "Knew what?" "The small matter of this new nuclear weapon technology." Richard shrugged. "If I'd told you, would you have cooperated? You probably would have tried to leak it to some media contact, and that would have forced our hand." He left it at that. Would he have had me killed in the interest of national security? Something like that, I supposed. In the world Richard inhabited, preserving secrets always merited higher consideration than human life. But I was a privy to that secret now. What would happen once the mission ended? I felt a chill go down my spine as I considered the possibilities. Richard was quietly puffing on his cigarette. He had too many men with him, working for him every moment. There was no way I could simply walk out of this house. But I had something up my sleeve as well, and I was not about to let myself be exploited without a fight. I looked over at my PC. The screensaver had kicked in, and geometric patterns flitted across the dark monitor. I slipped my PDA into my pocket and headed for the bathroom to send some mail. Man, remember screensavers? Remember when those were necessary? What a throwback. I always liked the one I liked the most was the colored pipes that um, ran in random directions and generated themselves crisscrossing. I realized many years later that those were probably pre-generated animations, and the pipes weren't actually going individual directions actively, but still, those were my favorites. I liked watching those. One of Richard's men trotted over with a slip of paper. Richard studied it, and after some consideration, raised Campbell on the radio. "What can I do for you, Major Ames?" Campbell's tone was openly hostile, but Richard paid no heed. "Colonel Campbell, I'd like you to start interrogating Naomi Hunter." "Interrogate her? What are you talking about?" Campbell said sharply. "There are suspicious points about Dr. Hunter's background, as you've heard. I've therefore sent one of my men over there to talk to her, but she seems reluctant to cooperate." Richard lit another cigarette. "But she's taking a nap," the colonel insisted. "Actually, she's not." "What?" "In reality, she's been taken into my agent's custody." "How dare you?" Campbell barked angrily. Richard was unfazed. "If, as Master Miller charged, Naomi Hunter has falsified her identity and is in communication with the enemy, there are serious repercussions. I trust you understand." "Foxdie," Campbell groaned. Foxdie? This was something new. This mission was like an onion, with layer after layer of secret intent. "She won't talk to my agent. She may talk to you. Find out from Naomi who she is and what her objective is." "Absolutely not. I don't take orders from you, and I'm having Dr. Hunter freed immediately." "What makes you think you can do such a thing?" replied Richard, exhaling a cloud of smoke. There was a long silence. "Who exactly the hell are you?" I could hear the barely suppressed rage in Campbell's voice. The DIA wouldn't have the authority to send a man into a Navy submarine and hold someone prisoner. Richard did not answer. Campbell continued. "And that's not the only thing. Nothing has been done through the usual channels, including the way you induced Snake and I to cooperate. This mission isn't even official business, is it? So who else can mount such a major operation?" Campbell suddenly broke off, as though struck by something. "Is it possible that... the Patriots?" he murmured. Richard ignored Campbell's outburst. "Does it matter what I am? It doesn't change the fact that your life, not to mention your precious Merrill's life, is in my hands. Isn't that right?" This time it was Campbell's turn to be silent. I had never suspected that his participation in the mission had been arranged by force. The colonel was literally fighting for his and his niece's life. "Think it over carefully, Colonel." Richard's voice was the coldest I had ever heard. There was no reply from Campbell. "And Snake has no need to know about any of this. We need his full cooperation at this point. Just tell him that Naomi was a terrorist spy and was apprehended while sending them a coded transmission." "Do you expect me to betray a friend? Keep him in the dark?" Campbell objected furiously. "That's what you've been doing already, Campbell." "A friend? Are you referring to Snake?" Richard smiled coolly. "Do you really think he considers you a friend anymore?" He had hit a sore spot. Campbell had no answer. Richard moved in for the kill. "You've already lied to him too many times." "Against my will, under your threats." Campbell was roaring, but Richard barely seemed to register his anger. "Certainly, but that's not an issue. You were, after all, giving him false information and relaying false orders to him of your own accord. Then there's Foxdie." I could almost see Campbell grinding his teeth in frustration and rage. "Do you still have the right to call yourself his friend?" There was nothing Campbell could say. "You will cooperate with us. Understood?" "Understood." The transmission ended. "Who are the Patriots?" Richard looked away towards another direction at my query. What are you talking about? Don't BS me. He turned towards me. His gaze was icy. Nothing you need to know about. By the way, not that I need to remind you, but don't mention to Snake things that don't concern him. And if I do? Richard's stony silence answered my uncompleted question. I was too far into this business, and suddenly seemed to sense danger everywhere. What do you intend to do with me once this mission is over? Nothing. Don't expect me to believe you. Richard allowed himself a brief, oddly sad smile. I suppose I can't. In the meantime, Snake was inching towards the launch code entry interface. At that point, he received a call from Master Miller. Snake, we need to talk about Naomi Hunter. The Colonel's looking into that. Turn the monitoring off. All right, it's off. Mission control is out of the loop. You want to tell me what this is about? How could she have heard this if the monitoring was off? Snake believed that he had switched us off, but I could still hear everything. Radio malfunction? I guess not. Someone had made sure that nothing could get past mission control, ever. I had a more than good idea who that someone was, but Master Miller obviously did not. Sorry about that. I didn't want Campbell to overhear. What is this about? Snake repeated. I have a contact at the Pentagon. He told me that a new assassination tool had been recently developed under DIA guidance. I looked over at Richard, but he pretended not to notice. Assassination tool? Snake was asking. Snake, have you ever heard the term fox die? I tensed. There was that word again. First Richard, then Campbell, now Miller. It seems to be a virus that can target specific individuals. I don't know the details, Miller continued. Richard remained expressionless next to me. So, what are you getting at? Snake raised his voice slightly, sounding annoyed by Miller's roundabout methods. They share common features. What shares common features? The deaths. The Arms Tech president and the DARPA chief, or I guess I should say decoy octopus. They both died of what looked like a heart attack, right? Yeah? Well, it seems that a death by foxdie virus looks like a case of heart attack. After a moment, Snake spoke up. Are you saying that Naomi was the one who set this up? Snake, think. Did Naomi give you any kind of a shot? The nanomachines, Snake murmured. Snake had in fact been injected with nanomachines and anti-hypothermia compound before the start of the mission. Was Miller suggesting that there was a killing virus in the mix as well? One thing's for certain, she's in the best position to perform this kind of sabotage. But we still don't know her motive or objective. What about the Colonel? Snake asked after a lengthy silence, his tone brooding and full of doubts. I don't know, and I don't think he's interrogated her yet either. All right, I'll ask him. Once he was off the radio with Miller, Snake called up Campbell. Colonel, any new developments with Naomi? I've just had her taken into custody. What? Snake said incredulously. She was sending a coded transmission to an Alaskan location. I don't want to believe it, but she's definitely one of the terrorists. Campbell sounded anguished. Are you sure? There's very little doubt. She's being interrogated right now. What kind of interrogation? I don't want to resort to force, but we don't even have thiopentothal on hand. Let me know if you learn anything. Unaware of the machinations behind this latest development, Snake ended the communication. I longed to tell him the truth, but knew that Richard and his men would never allow that to happen. Despite his growing doubts, Snake continued to penetrate deeper into the hangar. He had almost reached the code interface when a call suddenly came in. Snake, can you hear me? It's Naomi. Naomi? Snake exclaimed in surprise. What are you... Richard tensed and leaned forward. I managed to get to another transmitter. The Colonel and the others haven't noticed yet, Naomi whispered rapidly. Naomi, is it true? What the Colonel says? Yes, but not everything I told you is a lie. Some of it was the truth. Her voice was sorrowful. Who are you really? I don't know. I don't know what my parents looked like even, or what they were called. I bought the name I use, the whole identity, with hard cash. Remember I told you why I was so fixated on genes? That was the truth. Because you wanted to know who you were. That's what you said. Yes, I don't know what I am. My ethnic background, age. Naomi. There was a pause before Naomi started speaking again in a rush. I was picked up in northern Rhodesia in the 80s. I was an orphan. Rhodesia, during all the guerrilla warfare, Zimbabwe used to be a British colony, you know. There was a sizable Indian population there then. Maybe that's where I get the color of my skin, but I'm not even sure of that. Naomi, why dwell on the past? If you can understand who you are now, isn't that all that really matters? Understand what I am myself? No one could ever understand me, least of all myself. Naomi's voice was suddenly defiant. I was always searching for myself, alone, until I met my brother and him. Your brother? Snake asked. Yes, Frank Yeager. What did you say? Snake was taken aback. He was a child soldier, too. He found me almost dead of starvation on the bank of the Zambezi and fed me from his own small ration of food. Child soldiers. It is not rare for children to participate in war as combatants in many of the most conflict-ravaged regions of the world. This is especially true for those developing nations where minors account for the majority of the entire population. A harsh regiment can and does turn innocent children into the most brutal of soldiers. In many cases, various drugs are used to numb the natural fear response. The result is Anne marks them out for posting to the front lines of the fiercest battles and to scouting duties in the minefields. Yes, the man you destroyed is my brother, Frank Yeager, my only family. Naomi said quietly. That's impossible. Gray Fox is your brother. Snake could not hide his perturbation. We managed to survive hell together, all because he protected me. He was everything to me. He was the only witness to my existence, and the only one who made me feel like a real human being. Gray Fox brought you to the States? No, we met him in Mozambique. Him? Something seemed to click within Snake. You mean Big Boss? Yes. He led us here, finally made us free. But Frank went with Big Boss, back to the wars, and when he came home to me, he was... Naomi broke off. The silence spoke of smoldering anger, of irreparable loss. I promised myself that I would get you. You broke my brother. You as good as killed him. That's why I joined Foxhound, because I knew that I would run into you sooner or later. Well, you've got your chance now. Snake seemed to be taking all this in stride. He was no doubt accustomed to being the target of the enmity of others. Yes, I've waited 2 years, you know. Just for a chance to kill me? Exactly. 2 whole years, waiting for you and no one else. Yearning for revenge. It's almost like being in love. You still hate me? I wouldn't say that. There was a trace of hesitation in Naomi's voice. There are some things about you that I misunderstood. Did you kill your predecessor, that geneticist who was using Gray Fox for his experiments? You mean Dr. Clark? No, it was Frank that killed him. I covered up the whole thing, kept my brother safe. An uneasy silence fell. Is the ninja, Gray Fox, here to kill me? I don't think so. Frank is here to fight you, nothing more. I couldn't make sense of it at first, but I think I know now. A kind of a duel. He lives only for that, I think. Fox, Snake murmured, as though remembering the man who had once been his comrade. Tell me something, Naomi, he said a short while later. It's about Fox dye, isn't it? She said in a low, pained voice. It's a retrovirus. kills only the designated person by first infecting the macrophage. Foxdie is engineered with an oxygen chain that responds only to a specific DNA pattern. The oxygen is what recognizes the target DNA sequence. I don't think that's how that works. Once the recognition oxygen responds, Foxdie repurposes the macrophage's cellular structure to create TNF-alpha. Naomi had regained her old calm as she fielded Snake's question. What does that mean? It's a type of cytosine, a peptide that triggers cell death. The TNF-alpha travels through the bloodstream to the heart, where it binds to the receptors of cardiac cells. And that causes a heart attack. The affected cells undergo rapid apoptosis, and the owner of that heart dies. Apoptosis? I remember that. Programmed cell death for damaged cells, Snake murmured. The tense silence descended once again. Naomi. Yes? I know you programmed me to die. Naomi remained silent. Do I have any time left? Still no answer. Naomi, you have every right to take my life, but I can't die just yet. I still have work to finish. You have to listen. I'm not the one who decided on the use of Foxdie. Naomi burst out. Not you. It was a part of the mission plan to infect you with Foxdie. I wanted to tell you that. Naomi broke off, then suddenly made up her mind to continue. I'm not being honest with myself. Naomi? What I really wanted to tell you was... Snake, Naomi was struggling for words when suddenly a male voice barked behind her. Freeze! Step away! No! Naomi cried out sharply. She must have been spotted by one of Richard's toughs. I could hear the sound of a scuffle over the radio. Snake! With that last gasp, Naomi faded out of earshot. Naomi! Snake called out, but it was Campbell that answered him. Snake, I can't permit you to communicate with Naomi. What are you talking about? She's officially out of the mission. What did you do with her? How is infecting me a part of the plan? Colonel, let me talk to her. I can't do that, Snake. She's been confined. Colonel, you sold me out, didn't you? I could hear the rage in Snake's voice. Don't waste your energy thinking about things you can't change, Campbell said, his voice carefully guarded against any emotion. Stopping the Metal Gear is your first priority. Don't forget that. And that's a chapter break. So we are going to stop that there and finish in the Shadow of Shadow Moses, or whatever it's called, next time. We're going to stop here and start playing the game. So I'm going to end this recording.